Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin, and I am so excited to share a few of my favorite provisional cast-ons with you. You might not know what a provisional cast-on is. A provisional cast-on is a temporary way of casting your stitches onto your needle so you can go back and work those live stitches later. There's plenty of applications for a provisional cast-on. Sometimes I use them at the bottom of a sleeve or a sweater if I'm not sure how long I want them to be or how much yarn I'm going to have, because I can go back to those live stitches and work them later. Sometimes I use them when I'm designing shawls if I want to work a center shawl from the center out. I've done that on a few different shawl designs. I have also used provisional cast-ons. Let's see, where else do I use them? In my Novus sweater construction all the time when I need to go back and have those live stitches for working the side panels of the sweater. So there's lots of different places. Those are not the only ones by far. In this video, I'm going to teach you 3.5 different techniques for a provisional cast-on. One is a crochet cast-on that uses a smooth, light-colored, slippery yarn that's a scrap yarn that you'll pull out later. The other is an alternate crochet cast-on, so 2 different ways to do a crochet cast-on. The next is a crochet chain cast-on that also uses a light, smooth, slippery yarn in a light color. I already said light, let's just say that a few times. And finally, I'll teach you how to do a provisional cast-on over a spare circular needle or spare cord that you can go back and just put your live stitches onto your needle and work in the other direction from. I am really excited. The other thing that I spent some time showing you in this video is how to unzip your stitches and also how to deal with that pesky little half stitch that's so easy to drop when you go to put your stitches back on the needle. So let's jump right into the techniques. Definitely let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hi everybody, let's do a crochet cast on together. The first thing that you need to do is make a slip knot and put that onto your crochet hook. It's really important that that slip knot go onto your crochet hook and not onto your needle. Now, you'll grab your needle and bring the yarn behind your needle so that the crochet hook can reach over it, and then you're going to grab the yarn, pull it through that slip knot that is on your needle, and then bring the yarn in between your crochet hook and needle again. So I'm grabbing the yarn, pulling it through the hook, in between those 2 stitches, and you continue on like that. I am trying to go slowly so you can see all the steps. I've worked this cast on so many times that I have a feeling I can do it in my sleep. In between, reaching over, grabbing it. Remember, I am working with a yarn that is smooth, that is light colored, and that will unzip easily. When I get the stitch count onto my needle that the pattern calls for or that you want, you are then going to just crochet chain a few extra stitches. And what this does is let you know which end of your work to unzip from. This crochet chain will only unzip in one direction, so putting in those extra chains right there lets you know that is the end you should unzip from. And then I am just going to cut the yarn. I believe my yarn is already cut, and I'm going to pull that through right there. Let's get that in focus for you so that you are ready to go with the next step. Okay, so let's look at the underside of that crochet chain. There we go. The underside, as you can see, has a little bit of a, or it's not even a little bit, it has a twist to those stitches on the bottom there. This crochet cast on makes a really nice cast on in your working yarn. If you want to match a traditional bind off or have something that's elastic but firm and a little bit decorative, do you see that little twist right there? So you can use this cast on for other applications if you want. Now I want to show you another style of crochet cast on that looks a little different on the bottom. We're going to start the same in that we are going to make a slip knot, and that slip knot is going to go onto my crochet hook, so that's the same. And now I'm going to grab my needle, so that's the same, and I'm going to put my needle in front of the yarn, very similar to the other style I showed you. But now what's different is that I'm holding my crochet hook and my needle next to each other, parallel to each other. In the last version, they were perpendicular to each other. So I hold the crochet hook and the needle parallel to each other, and I'm going to bring the yarn over both, and I'm going to pull that yarn through the hook. Let me get things tightened up and in focus for you. Okay. Now I'm going to bring the yarn over both and pull it through. This cast on works really well for a provisional cast on, but I'm going to show you what the bottom looks like, the bottom edge of the cast on, and you're going to see how it's quite different from the last crochet cast on that I showed you. It ends up making a cast on that's much more elastic and loosey-goosey, and I haven't found what the application for this cast on would be for me other than a provisional cast on. You can see it's a little less finicky to work than that other crochet cast on because I'm not having to bring the yarn in between the hook and the needle. I'm just bringing the yarn over both the hook and the needle. Now when I look at the bottom side, you'll see that those stitches are quite open. Do you see that? They don't have a twist in them. Makes them much more elastic, which I think is really nice for a provisional cast on. I'm just not sure how I would use that. Maybe on a lace shawl on the bottom when I don't want something so loose like a backwards loop or E-cast on. Again, when you're done with that cast on, you'll crochet chain a few stitches and then cut your yarn and pull it through. What I want to do to make this even more clear, the difference between the two, is I'm going to work a few stitches with a traditional crochet cast on. Just so you can see that. I tend to use a hook and a needle size that are very similar in size. It's okay if you don't have a hook that's the exact same size as your needle. The stitches, because these are provisional stitches and they're going to get ripped out later, it's not going to affect your finished project. Okay. Now if I look at the bottom right there, you can see where it's twisted and then where it is loose. Let's get that completely in focus for you to see. So if we look at the bottom there, you can see these stitches are twisted that I worked with the crochet cast on the traditional way, and these stitches don't have a twist. A little bit different between the two of those. Okay, once you have your provisional cast on your needle, then you can go grab your working yarn and work the first row of your pattern with your working yarn in whatever stitch the pattern calls for. Your pattern might tell you to knit the first row, it might tell you to purl the first row. Just follow what your pattern says. Let's pretend my pattern says to knit the first row, since that's what I'm doing. I'm knitting with my working yarn,
And then before I continue on in the pattern, I am going to place a lifeline into all of these stitches on my needle through all of that first row of working yarn stitches. Sorry, I'm just kind of getting my... So I have some really lightweight, strong buttonhole thread that I am going to be threading through with a bent tip needle every stitch on my needle. You don't have to do this step, but what it means is if you place a lifeline in this row, you can unzip that provisional cast on anytime you want and not worry about losing any stitches. Sorry, I just got some like loose stitch right there, so I'm going to try and tighten that down, make things look tidy for you. So what I do after I place the lifeline is I go ahead and cut the other end, and I tie those two ends together of the lifeline into a knot, leaving myself a little extra room. Then you can just trim the ends if you want, if it's bugging you. And what that does is just make it so all of those stitches are caught on a lifeline. So if I want to unzip this provisional cast on right now, I would have all of these stitches caught. I would work a row or two more because if I unzip right now, this stitch is going to become undone, and we will talk about that a little later in this video. Next up, let's make a crochet chain cast on. You're going to start with a slip knot and put that slip knot onto your crochet hook, just like that. And now you're just going to start making a crochet chain. Wrapping the yarn over the hook and pulling it through the loop on the hook. The trick to this is to not pull your stitches too tight. You might find you need to work with a bigger size crochet hook if you tend to do this tightly, because you're going to need to be able to get into the bump on the back of that chain to create your first row of knitting. So you just continue on, and the trick here is to make your chain a few chains longer than stitches you need. So if you need 20 stitches for this, put on like 23 or 24. And I'll show you why in a second. Let's make sure we're in focus. It's so pretty when it's in focus. Okay, a few more chains on there. And now let's cut our yarn. And then just pull that end through, finishing it off. And pretty important, tie a knot in that end right there that you just cut. And that is because then you'll know which end to unzip from, because this chain will only unzip in one direction, kind of like those dog or cat food bags that are sewn on the top. Now let's look at the bottom of your chain and the top of your chain. You'll notice that the top is flat and that the bottom side of the chain has a little bump on it. Do you see that bump right there? We're going to pick up a stitch into each one of these bumps. You can pick up those stitches as if to knit or to purl. I am going to pick them up as if to knit just to make life easy on myself. And I'm going to grab my working yarn and get all ready here, and then I'm going to wrap my working yarn around my needle and pull that stitch onto the needle. There you have it. I am just working across, picking up a stitch in every bump, putting it onto the needle. You'll notice I started just a few chains in right there. And I'll do the same on the other side, and I'll be picking up all of the stitches that I need for my pattern. This counts as the first row of your knitting. So if you want to place a lifeline after you get all of your stitches onto your needle with your working yarn, that is when you would go ahead and do that step. Unzipping this and unzipping the crochet cast on is exactly the same, and I will show you that next. Okay, so I just finished knitting this little teeny tiny swatch for you, and you can see that I've got my provisional cast on here and I've got my lifeline. So what I want to do is rip out the provisional cast on and show you how that lifeline is holding all of your stitches and how you'll save that first stitch right there. So I'm coming to the end, and I know which end I need to unzip from because that is where the crochet chain is. And I'm just going to undo that chain. Bear with me. Right here. And I'm going to undo it, and it should just unzip just like that. And now I'm moving that out of the way, and I'm going to unzip the whole chain, and you can see that the lifeline held all of my stitches in place. Okay, I have ripped out my provisional cast on. I've got my lifeline holding all of my stitches, but I'm missing one stitch on the end right here because there's a half stitch when you start your provisional cast on live stitches, and it gets dropped down right there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put all of these stitches that are on the lifeline back onto my working needle one at a time, being careful not to split them. Okay, I've got all those stitches on the needle, and now I need to pick up that last stitch, which I can see right here on the end, and I'm going to put it on the needle so it has an orientation of all of the other stitches on my needle, with the right leg to the front and the left leg to the back. And now my stitch count is the same on both ends of the fabric, and I'm ready to start with a piece of working yarn working across these stitches. So that is how you use a lifeline to catch all of your stitches when you work a provisional cast on. It makes the unzipping really lovely, gotta say. And you can take out that lifeline now, or you can leave it in. That is totally up to you. Okay, so here's a finished little swatch, and I want to show you unzipping a provisional cast on. I do not have a lifeline placed here. So I'm going to be unzipping this provisional cast on. I'm going to unzip from this end right here where I have the extra chains and the knot on the end if you put it. And I just want to flip this over to show you something. So what happens with your knitting is that you have a half stitch on this end and a half stitch on this end. So if I just go to pull out my provisional cast on, I'm going to be one stitch short on my needles. So when I show you guys with the lifeline, placing the lifeline and then pulling out your provisional cast on, I picked up this stitch right here on this end to make up that last stitch. On this end, I want to show you something else that you can do before you go to take out your provisional cast on that will give you that last stitch right there. In this case, it's my 14th stitch. So I'm just going to put that end, the tail right there, onto my needle. And then you can see that I can just thread my needle through that edge stitch right there, and that will actually create the last stitch, so that when I go to rip this out, I will have a stitch on the end right there. So that is one way to deal with that pesky extra stitch that you need that is lost in translation, if you will. So now what I'm going to do is unzip the provisional cast on and get these stitches onto a needle. I find that that's a little easier to do with a needle that is maybe a few sizes smaller than your working needle, so that it can slip very easily into the stitches. So I am unzipping right here, and this first stitch, you might find that it gets wrapped up and you need to pull it out. Just like, almost like that. And then I'm gonna take that stitch, let's make sure everything's in focus for you, and put it into the needle. And now I'm just going to unzip the provisional cast on and put my stitches onto the needle, one at a time. You can see I'm going in with the needle from the back to the front and then unzipping it. Back to the front, unzipping it. Back to the front, unzipping it. Back to the front, unzipping. Now there's that extra half stitch on that side, but since I picked up already on the other side, I don't need to pick up that stitch. If I hadn't done what I did on this side, I would be picking up that stitch there and making that my 14th stitch. But I made it up on this end. There you have it. Now when I go to work across those stitches, make sure that you grab your working needle and don't continue to work with that small needle. That just helped you get those stitches easily onto your needle, ready to work. Provisionally cast on stitches are cool. Okay, for this style of provisional cast on, you are going to need a circular needle or just a extra spare cord if you have one from an interchangeable set, and your working needles, whatever they are, be straight or circular, and your working yarn. You're not actually using scrap yarn for this technique. If you are using a spare circular needle, just make sure it is the same size or 1 or 2 sizes smaller than your working needle. It probably shouldn't be bigger than your working needle. This is a really easy technique, so I'm psyched to share it with you. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is make a slip knot with your working yarn. Put that onto your circular needle and know that that does not ever count as a stitch. You're going to end up counting the stitches that you make onto your working needle. So let's try and get 10 on there. The first thing that you're going to do is make a yarn over onto your working needle. And now reach down in front of the cord, go grab your working yarn and put it on. And now I've got 2 stitches on my needle. Make a yarn over 3, go and grab 4, yarn over 5, go and grab 6, yarn over 7, go and grab 8, yarn over 9, go and grab 10. The last stitch you should be making will be the stitch onto the cable. All right, so now we're ready to go. And I'm going to turn my work. This counts as the first row of knitting right here. So your next row actually will be row 2 in your pattern. So whatever row 2 says in your pattern, like if row 2 is a knit row in your pattern, then you're going to be going ahead and knitting across these stitches for row 2. And that is basically how you get set up. I'm just going to work across this row and tell you at the same time that I will be showing you how to deal with the stitches that are on your cable. So I'm going to work stockinette stitch for a bit on this, get it nice and going. This first row is a little loosey-goosey, so you just want to be all tidy and tight. There you go. And now that's the first row worked. And I'm going to continue working a bit, and then I will show you how to handle things on the other side, okay? Okay, let's pretend I just finished knitting half my sweater and I'm ready to go back to the provisional stitches on the other side. I bound off over here, and now I'm going to turn things around, and the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of that slip knot. Remember I told you guys, oh, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my needle is screwed in all the way. And now I am just going to get rid of that slip knot right there, because that does not count as a stitch. And now I'm ready to work across these provisionally cast on stitches. As my pattern says, you're going to want to work with your working yarn. You know what I'm going to do to be fun? I'm going to just use a different yarn just so you can really see the difference here. And this first stitch presents with the right leg to the front, and I'm going to knit it through the front. But you'll notice that next stitch has the left leg to the front of the needle. So I'm going to work that stitch through the back to orient it correctly and not twist it. Just like so. There you have it. That is the first row of knitting. So if I continue on, not using that circular needle anymore, but just with my working needles, you're going to see a perfectly blind join right there. If you were doing one of my novice construction sweaters, those live stitches, you would just end up having them onto your working needle ready to work the side panel. So using this technique is a pretty cool option for that pattern if you want to. Let's get that in focus just so you can look at all those pretty stitches. And if I just pull down on that end right there and tidy it up, that shows you how to use a cable for a provisional cast on.
There you have it. A little over 3 ways to do a provisional cast on. I can't wait to hear what you think. Definitely let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to hear in the comments which of these cast-ons is your favorite. It's okay for you to change your mind as you learn other techniques for doing provisional cast on. Let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.